I've always been pretty sensitive and open. I had a lot of mediumistic experiences when I was growing up. Some of them were very freaky and kind of like scared me, and I kind of pushed it away. So at a certain point in my life, I was having like regular out of body experiences, and that definitely put reality upside down. And this is before I ever did psychedelics or plant medicine, so these experiences were happening not with the use of any sort of assistance, right? I won't say, oh, I was born with it. I think everybody's born with superpowers, as you're calling them.
The container is now open. Several months ago, I had an extremely spooky experience, but only because Sai had just had an extremely magical, spooky experience. In the community, there was an energy healer who was passing through, and she was staying at this beautiful eco spa retreat center called the White Lotus. And there were some open slots available. So Sai, seeing that call, jumped at the opportunity. And when you came home, Sai, from that experience, I was like, oh, I don't need an energy healer or whatever, I'm just gonna do my thing over here. Then Sai comes back and is like, you have got to book a slot. It's like she's psychic and she was like seeing stuff and like she was reading my mind, and then and she was like fixing things through just like moving my body, and I was like so intrigued, right? So then I booked my own session, and what followed, I went from having virtually I'm not like a huge skeptic, but I had no real working appreciation or knowledge of energy healing and no real confidence in it, to over the course of about 90 minutes being like, okay, so this is the most powerful way to do healing. And this is like, yeah, I have to like change ways that I think about the human body now. I'm so like energy healing coded after that I'm just like, can humans live to be 200? Like, what is possible now? Um, yeah, so we had to bring her onto the podcast, right? And then, yes, of course, the mystery of fate intervened, and there were all these interruptions. And then today on the recording, it almost slipped through our fingers through technical issues. But we have her in recording with us, Lubaina Choudhury. And we are so excited to talk to you about energy healing, the powers of like that we have to interact with each other's bodies, to heal and to see and to know each other. And before we launch into that conversation, I'm getting goosebumps already about where we're going to go. I'm so excited. But before we get there, we would just like to thank our patrons. They went to patreon.com/the container. They made a commitment to making small monthly donations, and that helps us do our show. We need a lot more. We support the work we're doing, support the research, support the innovations that we're cooking up here in Charlottesville, Virginia. If a money contribution doesn't feel right at this moment, or if you've already made that and would like to help out even more, on YouTube, like, subscribe, comment. If you're listening to this in Spotify or Apple, you probably haven't given us a glowing 5-star review yet. So just do that. Those things actually really, really, really help us. And you can do it in just a minute. Yeah. So with that, Lubaina, I would like to invite your voice into the space. How are you doing today?
Hi, thanks so much, Jonathan. That was an awesome intro. I appreciate it. Yeah, good to see both of you, Sai and Jonathan. It was a wonderful experience with the two of you in Charlottesville when I was there. And I got to see Sai again in DC when I was passing through there. And she drove up, and that was quite fun too. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Good to be on
Mm,
this podcast.
mm. Yeah. I wonder, maybe just a good place to start, if you could give a description of what you do, um, for people across the spectrum of how much they know about energy healing. When I met you, I knew almost nothing. I knew the word Reiki, and that was the total limit of my understanding of energy healing. So,
Okay.
yeah, could you help us out?
Sure. Well, the funny thing is, I actually didn't know that about you. I found that out while you were telling this story that you had no introduction to energy healing. I would not have thought of that given the experience you had in your session, because you just knew how to move with it, and you had a really open, receptive way of just letting your body go through it. So I wouldn't have guessed that you didn't know or had very little introduction to energy healing, right? So it's a little challenging sometimes for me to put into words exactly what I do, because there's a little more nuance than just energy healing. Because most of the time when people say energy healing, they are talking about Reiki, they're talking about some other modalities, but it's mostly like working with chi, working with ki. What I practice, we don't even have an official name for it, but an officially like patented official name, like Reiki is like registered, trademarked. But we don't have a name for it like that. Uh, but we roughly call it movements of light. And sometimes I've called it conscious body, or even body work and consciousness. So we've played with a few different names. Nothing's really stuck enough for us to like go out and get it like trademarked, right? But the modality that I practice is based on the Kabbalah, because my teacher is Jewish and that's his background. My background, on the other hand, is yoga and more Eastern mystical traditions in terms of body, right? But when I met him, I had a pretty miraculous experience on his table with body work that was like very physiological, as well as energetic, as well as spiritual. Like, it was really, I call it miracle. I say he saved my life, and that is absolutely true. This work saved my life. And I was his patient for 7 years. And then I became his student, and then I became a practitioner, right? And this modality uses the body as a portal for deeper layers of consciousness. So we're starting off with tensions and tones, but we're really moving into how someone holds themselves in space, and how that forms their perception of the world and how they experience the world, right? So, from a Kabbalistic perspective, in the Kabbalah, they say any contraction is a turning away from the light of God. That's how they express it, right? And so the natural movement of healing is to move towards the light of God. That's how they would word it, right? And now the overlap of this work with yoga for me is that in the Kabbalah, they work with the 5 levels. They call it the 5 levels of the soul. And in yoga, we call it the 5 yogic sheets, or 5 koshas, or 5 bodies. So the physical body is the densest level of manifestation. It's what we believe to be me, right? But what's informing the physical body are these deeper layers of consciousness. So you have the chi body, which is what most people work with when they work with Reiki, right? And then you have the mental and emotional bodies. And then you have other subtler bodies, which in yoga, they call it like wisdom body or bliss body. And ultimately, a space where there's no body, there's no distinction, no individuality, right? So it just gets subtler and subtler. So in our modality, we're using the physicality to access the source, because the physicality is a manifestation of the source. It's not the end all be all. It's not where it starts. It starts in these deeper layers of consciousness. But because they're kind of like Russian dolls, you can use one to go into the other. So that's what we work with when we do this work. It can be done distantly. You guys experienced it in person, and we it looks like you're doing actual physical adjustment, right? A lot of people tell me that my work reminds them of osteopathy, for example, right? But we're not staying limited to the physical body. So I hope that's a pretty long-winded explanation, but it's a little difficult to explain sometimes because it's not simplistic sort of thing. It's so experiential. That's what I mean. It's not an intellectual thing. So yeah.
Just hearing you describe how you see your work, I'm really, really in touch with this way that it can be as simple as, oh, you're tense here. And then that kind of adjusts the way you're showing up in the room.
Hmm.
And just if you're listening to this, like everyone has had that experience of it. If you walk around kind of slumped shoulders and kind of head down, you just feel less confident than if you throw your head back. So that even just there, you can kind of feel like, oh yeah, the way I'm physically resting in the room, it changes my experience of the room. And that is a very, very relatable touch point. And then I just find it so beautiful. You have this way to bring that very relatable experience into dialogue with an understanding that brings us to literally to God and our connection with God. Yeah, I'm just really sitting with that.
Yeah, what really strikes me is the reality, I guess you could say, that our physical body is being created by the subtle, like that it's from out to in. I think there's, I walking around in my like human suit have this idea that, and even in meditation or in practices where where we're working with the more subtle bodies, it seems like it goes this other direction, and thinking, remembering that it comes from from those layers out to in, and that's actually what builds this dense structure that is our me body. Is just, yeah, it's this revolutionary way of thinking about it. Yeah.
Actually, what you said is a very important point, right? Because most of the time we do think of ourselves as like bottom up,
Right.
like physical, mental, emotional, energetic. Like that's the way we tend to think about ourselves, right? Or even tend to think of our physicality, our experience of life, whatever you want to call it, right? But it's top down, and I've read a few books on like the koshas and the explanations of koshas, and it's like the yogic masters, they say, if you think of the koshas as a, like, I'm obviously paraphrasing them, but like if you think of them as bottom up, you're mistaken and you're missing what's actually happening. So the
Mhm.
more you learn to think of it as top down, the more in touch you are with what's actually happening. Because Yogananda called it the astral world, right? He that was kind of his term for some of this like subtler places that we come from, right? Or the physical world gets built from, right? And he said the astral world is more real than the physical world, And if you knew the power of the astral world, you'd be able to understand what happens in the physical so much more, right? And another pretty well known author, Carlos Castaneda, when he talked about Don Juan said the same thing. He said, this is primarily a world of energy. And if you believe that this is the world of objects, you'll be stopped by the certainty that this is the world of objects. But if you know that this is primarily a world of energy, then you can open, he called it second perception.
Mm.
So, very important point there.
Yeah, and it also kind of turns on its head the idea of, or a way that one could orient themselves toward doing inner work, like shadow work. There's because I'm imagining, you know, thinking of things in that direction. There's a way to bypass the mind and just go straight into the body, to go straight into the physicality. Whereas I think when I sit down to, you know, maybe journal about my shadows or like try to, you know, dig things out from the unconscious, it gets easier. It's like easier for it to get stuck in the mind versus pulling in from, you know, and then into the body. I don't know. For me, it just sounds like, oh, that sounds more pleasurable or like, I don't know, less sticky or something. Less sticky is maybe sticky in terms of getting stuck in the conditioned mind with these inner work practices that we do. Yeah.
Yeah, I would also say at one point, body mind becomes one as we perceive in this way, you know, like the body just reflects the consciousness. And that's kind of the basis of the modality I practice as well, you know, which is why it's easy for me to see. Well, some people will say, oh, that was like totally psychic. How did you know this? And I'm like, well, your energy told me, you know, and your energy told me when I touched your body. Sometimes I get like very specific visuals, you know, of what happened. Right. Like one time I was working on somebody and I was working on their neck and they had a lot of neck trauma, right? Just tense and constant pain and stuff like that. And I had a visual of a child drowning. Like that's what came up. And I was like, hey, this is what I'm seeing. And she was like, oh my God, this happened when I was 4 years old. I didn't even realize that this could be related because she's like in her 30s and forgotten, you know, it's not like a memory that you just keep, but her body remembers, you know, because it has that energy stored and it's just reflecting, you know. So we say the body is a vessel and it's also a mirror. Yeah.
When you talk about that, and I've experienced this directly, this remarkable ability you have to sort of venture to be like, hey, is there something about, you know, when I'm touching here, there's like something about this going on, and it's exactly what I was thinking about, you know, at the moment. I'm curious about if that has been an ability that you've always either had in total or had glimpses of, or if it's something that you really developed through this work. I guess, like, personally, I'm interested in developing superpowers for myself. I can't imagine there's anyone listening who wouldn't want to at least have more contact with this kind of knowing, or it's almost like allowing yourself to know things. Yeah.
That's a nice way of putting it. It's I'll use the words of Don Juan, opening second perception, you know. And well, to answer your question directly about whether I had these sort of ways of seeing before doing this work, the answer is yes. I've always been pretty sensitive and open. I had a lot of mediumistic experiences when I was growing up, right? And some of them were very freaky and kind of like scared me, and I kind of pushed it away. So I've had stuff like that happen throughout my life. I had at a certain point in my life, I was having like regular out of body experiences, you know, and that definitely put reality upside down. And this is before I ever did psychedelics or plant medicine, you know. So these experiences were happening not with the use of any sort of assistance, right? So I guess there's one way of looking at it, which is I won't say, oh, I was born with it. I think everybody is born with superpowers, as you're calling them. I'll use air quotes for it because I think these are natural gifts and tendencies we have that because of social conditioning and just because of the way that we get raised to believe certain things, we lose the knowing that we're able to have these sort of experiences, right? Or this deeper awareness is probably a better way of saying it, right? So at one point when I was really sensitive, and I know this is true of many people who are sensitive, and so it's not a unique thing at all, but I would feel what somebody was thinking. So it would be more of a feeling sense, which is my strongest sense. And I think everybody's strongest sense. Like, so I would feel what they were saying, but their words wouldn't match what they're feeling, you know? And that was pretty disturbing at some point because I was like, oh, this person is saying something, but that's not what I'm feeling from them. And I remember being kind of confused, right? And being like, am I imagining this? Because that's not what they're saying. But people often won't say what they mean, right? Unless they've done a certain amount of work and they realize that they're being inauthentic, right? But the body is very innocent. It never lies, you know?
Mhm.
So the person can say whatever they want, but their energy will inform us of what's actually going on, right? So, and then for the second part of the question that you asked, like, can this be developed? Absolutely, because we all have it, right? You might not have it in the same way that I do. Yours might look different and feel different and seem to be a different ability, so to speak, right? But I would say almost everybody has either clairaudience, clairvoyance. Maybe some people get it more in dreams. Maybe some people just have like a hunch, you know? So developing these skills happens when we start trusting ourselves, you know, and we trust the inner voice, right? So when I teach this modality now, you know, especially in the last couple of years, I've taught a bunch of workshops, and that's always the biggest hurdle for people. You know, they're like trusting what they're feeling and sensing and going into. So I often have people work in pairs, and I'll say, work with someone you don't know, because then when you get information, then you can get it's validating, you know, because the other person would be like, yes. And it's also, just to be clear, like, it's not even necessary to have this sensing, seeing abilities to do this work, right? As long as you're sensitive and open to energetics, emotions, and being able to be available for someone and hold space, you can do this work. You know, you don't have to have
Mm.
any specific gifts, so to speak. The gift is your presence.
Yeah. That I'm noticing this connection to, you know, the relating arts in general.
Mhm.
Um the first thing that came up is you know, imagining you having these feelings watching someone say something different than what you were, you know, feeling they were feeling.
Yeah.
And then I'm remembering times in my life where, you know, I've tried to interact with that person from, you know, from what my experience of them was, and not doing it very skillfully and making big messes.
Yeah.
And then over time with the relating arts and with these practices that we do and circling, learning these other ways of sort of, it's like I have an intuition, but this person is naming what you know what they say is true, and like how can we skillfully find, you know, because I think a lot of times too, you know, not only, you know, a person is saying, oh no, I'm fine, and maybe they really aren't in touch with the way that they're not fine.
Mhm.
And
Absolutely.
then yeah, as the sensitive, at least for me too, like it's like, well, I'm not going to force you to believe the thing that I, you know, intuitively kind of know is true or
Though it
something.
would be for your own good, obviously. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm well along those lines. I'm so fascinated by this. There's a difference between just having a physical or like that second perception, knowing that maybe there's more than meets the ear of the words being said, and then there's also projection, which I
Yeah.
spent a lot of my life honing the skill of projecting what was going on in me on
You and
others.
everybody else.
Yeah. So, like, you know, when I was getting into circling and nonviolent communication and stuff, a lot of my early like baby steps were check your stories, just learn how to, um, when you think something's going on for someone, to not just go ahead and believe it. And that's almost always true at the level of mind, is that like my story is to some degree a reflection of what's going on for me. But then I love you're talking about there's this like the on the body level, the body's not lying. Like you're feeling something different. And yeah, so I'm just really delighted by the way that it's this sort of it's this way these two things might seem similar, but they're actually quite different. It's like the mind making up stories or the body sensing something and just knowing something about the situation. It's really, ooh, it's like, yeah, tantalizing. I wonder about that.
Well, I can say that the projections will always come from the mind. No doubt about that, right? And the mind does not like to stay in a place of not knowing, so it always just wants to know everything about everybody all the time. So it's like constantly sizing everything up and everyone up, right? And making a judgment. Well, they said this, ergo, like that's what the mind will do. But if you're really paying attention, and the mind does what it does, right? Like there's no controlling thoughts because we're not in charge ever anyway, right? But if we just let the thoughts do what they're doing, but we use our inner perception, right? And we follow, like, for example, one time I was having a conversation with my teacher about relationships and about like how when you have certain patterns in relationships. I went through a period because I've known him for almost 14 years now, right? So I went through a period where I had like really toxic relationships, and I felt it coming to an end, right? Because I could see that I was releasing patterns in myself, that like the trauma was no longer there to like attract certain situations, right? But I was talking to him about this and I said, well, now how do I trust that the next person that I'm attracted to is not going to be like a trauma bond, is not going to have like some hidden toxicity that I just don't see, right? And he was like, well, the easiest way is notice what your body does in their presence. Does it relax in their presence, or does it get overexcited and overstimulated, right? So if your nervous system, because your nervous system is very, very intelligent, right? And it's picking up on things that your mind is not picking up on because your mind is busy trying to judge and label and control, right? So if your nervous system gets overstimulated in someone's presence, even if it's exciting, right? Even if it's like sexually stimulating, might not be good news in terms of a relationship. Might be fun, right? Might be a short-term fun thing, but in the long term, if you're looking for stability and if you're looking for like a real bond, then it has to be someone in whose presence your body relaxes and your nervous system is at the least neutral, not overexcited. Maybe a little excitation is good, you don't want to be like icked out by somebody, right? If you're planning on dating them. But if you feel overstimulated, that's a sign that they're going to bring something out in you that's not nice, So that's a very good example, in my opinion, of understanding how we can trust our physicality and our nervous system more than we can our judgments and our projections.
Mm-hmm. Man. That wisdom, had it been delivered to me when I was 14 years old, I think I chased that high of that excitement with my nervous system, like my whole, teen and adult life. And it's really, this is kind of a personal thing, but when Jonathan and I met, we were only friends. Like we developed this deep friendship. And I would even go as far to say is like, yeah, he was my first relationship where it was like we were starting from this baseline of that calm, grounded, like, oh, we can have an actual conversation where we trust each other and make a decision whether we want to take it to this next, like, more intimate level. And I've never, ever, even with the directly previous relationship, was it that. So but then I have a teen daughter and I think about, how just, she could just get so in her, nervous system about these boys.
Yeah, we chase the thrill, but that also has to do with certain conditioning and traumas that we receive as a child, right? and we're going to
Yeah.
directly, and those create certain contractions in our body, and then the contractions feel familiar. So people who feed our contractions feel like love, feel like
Right.
familiar. So we chase that until we decide to do the work and sort of are able to break down that pattern and see it for what it is. The interesting thing that I encountered with this story that I just shared is once you break the pattern, like you're no longer there and you see it exactly for what it is, you will have to meet it again and make a different decision in order for it to register properly in your nervous system. So the way it appeared for me was to encounter someone that I would have, like the old me, so to speak, would have found more exciting, or like just been like, oh yeah, no, let's do this, And with the new information that I had, I'm calling it information, maybe understanding, insight, whatever you want to call it, right? Like this new way of just being with myself, and ergo wanting a new sort of dynamic in relationships. When I found myself overstimulated, I was like, oh, this is where I get to make a choice. This is where I get to say no, thank you, even though a part of me still kind of wants to. And that's the interesting thing about the shadow. And I did say no, and then I felt great, I felt really empowered and all of that. And now I believe, I haven't been in a relationship for a while, but I don't chase red flags anymore. They're no longer fun flags, they're actual red flags. So, they used to be fun flags. You're like, this is gonna be a party. No.
I'm curious if you have wisdom to share on the work, beginning this work in listening and coming into contact with your body and getting this kind of second perception through that wisdom.
Well, it felt very natural, that I can say. It didn't feel like a lot of work. It didn't feel like I was trying really hard. In fact, even when I work with people now, when I find myself trying too hard, even if the intention is to help somebody, I feel like my work is not as potent as it is when I'm not going so like, oh, I gotta figure this out. So it is a more natural process. This wisdom is innate to us, right? This way of being is very natural, right? And this connection is natural, connection with each other, and then connection with the deeper realms, right? So one way of saying it would be alignment with soul, right? So in shamanism, which is my sort of influence, has a lot of influence in my modality. Different sort of traditions of shamanism have influence on my modality. And I always say I call my teacher a shaman, even though he's not like a Native American shaman, or, he's a Kabbalistic shaman, I would say. But so I also have a lot of influence from shamanism in my work. So in shamanism, they say any illness or dis-ease is the result of soul loss, right? You might have heard that if you've been around indigenous traditions, right? And what they mean by soul in this case is our vital essence, So they say that parts of us go hiding, when we experience trauma, when we experience a shock to our system, which happens to pretty much everybody in their lives, right? In different ways, in different forms, and those parts of us go away, right? And the way that we would look at it is from an energetic perspective, you're not in connection with the vital part of yourself, right? So if you've done internal family systems and work like that, then that might be called parts work in those systems. So we're working with someone's energy field to bring back that part of them, right? And sort of integrate it with the whole. Because what happens is it never fully is gone, right? It's not like disappeared into the ethers, but it's rather contracted energy, right? And it's kind of somewhere in the field, but it's like taking energy from the rest of your field, right? And it's a perception, and it's shaping the way that you experience life because it's this contracted energy. So for me, understanding this wisdom was through my own experiences of this, right? So this healing work wouldn't be so powerful for me had I not had the experience of what it could do for me, right? So when I ended up on my teacher's table, I was very sick and the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with me, and I'd been in the emergency room for more than 24 hours. I had not eaten in 5 days. I was sick with something. The doctors were like, we just don't know what it is, but physically I was exhibiting all these symptoms. And he worked on me for an hour, and I had deep emotional releases. I passed out several times. I cried. I was shaking. I had visuals and memories come up of certain parts of my life, and it was like a whole psychedelic trip, and sometimes people will tell me that that's what they experience on my table. I felt like I took something, even if I
Yeah.
haven't taken something, I feel like I had a whole journey, right? And that was what it was like for me. So because I have that direct experience, that reference point of feeling into this wisdom and what it can do, I naturally have a connection to it. So once you feel it, you have the ability and connection to it now. Now, it might not manifest for you as body work. Maybe it manifests just in the way that you carry yourself in the world now. Or there's many ways of doing this work. Like it can be done through sound. I know some amazing sound healers. It can be done through different ways, right? I like the body work, and that's what I was taught, and I enjoy it. But sometimes I use sound with it too, and I'll use some other sort of tools, crystals, things like that. But the point is that once you're able to see what it does for you, how does it change your life? So that's how I access the wisdom. It's like it changed my life. It started showing me, like I remember when I first started doing the work, I would text my teacher and say, "Hey Danny, I'm having these like really intense negative thoughts. Like it's just pretty nonstop, right? The negativity is pretty nonstop." And he was like, "Well, it's always probably been there. You're just noticing it now. You're just noticing what's happening. There's more awareness, right?" And so stuff like that, and other experiences too of like physical healing, or like the change that I described in how I approach relationships. So that direct experience of this innate knowing, this innate wisdom that we have, will give you the ability to be able to then help others with it if you choose.
Yeah, this brings up so much. When I was with you, when we did a session together, something that I noticed, and was quite different from other. I've done trauma informed somatic healing, with another healer, really incredible guy as well. But something that was distinctly different, and that I think you're sort of speaking to, is that I really felt you there, like, because I often wonder, like, where, in these practices, like, where are you in all of this? Like, where is the healer in all of this? Because obviously that you're part of the field. Your subtle bodies are interacting with mine. Like we're co-creating like a whole thing. And something that was so remarkable was, as you were working on me, you were having an experience too, and you weren't hiding that. Like it was clear that there was impact, and that there were ways that, like if you were pulling something really intense from me, that it like that you could kind of feel some of that as well. And yeah, and I imagine that's, yeah, for a multitude of reasons, like because it's actually really happening for you, but that you share it and that you're not hiding it, I think really added a depth to the experience, and maybe even to the ultimate major healing adventure I went on for the next month. um, yeah, so and that also has me again kind of tying it back to the relating arts and the ways that when we're in community, or when we're with each other, and we're sharing this physical space or even space in Zoom, that when we reveal ourselves and when we, even if we're intensive, or the intention is to work with the other person, like say they're being coached, but the more we can reveal our experience and meet what their experience is revealing, there's like this magic that happens, and it sort of is this exponential growth, or I don't know, energy.
Yeah. I mean, I find it very hard to hide what I'm feeling, you know? Sometimes it'll happen where a release just spontaneously happens and it's happening through me, so to speak, right? And I'll start like almost throwing up, you know, and but it's like an energetic thing that's just moving, and I'm not trying to take it on for somebody. That's usually a pretty bad idea, because if you do that, then you might not release it fully, and now you're carrying some stuff around that you've just absorbed from people, which is a little bit of a professional hazard sometimes, you know, of doing healing work, right? That you can definitely pick stuff up because you're sensitive, right? You're sensitive, and I find like women have a harder time with that, not in the sense of, oh, we pick up more, but more in the sense of we hold on to more because our bodies are designed to receive, right? And for men, they find it a little easier to just sort of let go. That's just been my experience so far in terms of physicality and form and just energetic signatures of the masculine and feminine, how they differ in a healing space. So I find it very challenging to like hide if something's moving through. I mean, I don't want to hide unless I feel like the person's going to freak out or something, you know, in which case maybe I'll go to the bathroom and hurl a little bit and then come back, right? Most of the time people are not, you know, affected by my expressions, right? Because it's not all the time. Sometimes it'll happen and it'll be spontaneous, right? And to your point, like it is two fields meeting, right? Two fields meeting. And then there's also the element of two nervous systems meeting. That's part of the field, right? Like two nervous systems meeting, and two nervous systems can co-regulate more easily than one. I'm sure you guys know that from all the circling and authentic relating work that you've done, right? So that's part of the picture for someone doing this work like myself. What's also present for me is the presence of the healer, meaning that you carry a certain field, and the very fact that you're sort of embodying an archetype for people, right? When they come to you and they're asking for support, they're asking for help, healing, whatever it is that they're there for, but there's an archetypal embodiment happening, right? And because you're embodying that archetype, you cannot be separate. The healer is never separate from the healing equation, you know? And I never know how it's going to go. Like, it's so unpredictable for me. You know, sometimes I have people sobbing for 2 hours on my table. Sometimes they've fallen asleep. Like, it's, and that's just what their nervous system needs, right? But I'm, as I come in, the presence of the healer is important. Like how you hold yourself is important. If I'm having an off day, I have to meditate and put my shit aside. I don't know if I can swear here, but I just did. Put my put my BS to the side. Even and actually sometimes when I have BS going on, that's when it's even more potent for me, because that requires me to be like laser focused, right? And I can't. Sometimes I'll have like something physical going on in my body. And one time I threw out my back for 2 weeks. And by the end of that time, I had to work. Like I didn't have a choice. I was like, I live in New York City. I have rent due, you know? And I was like, okay, let me try and see what happens. And I found that because I had this thing, it was so much more of a mindful experience, you know, that I came in with a different sort of intention. So sometimes my shadow periods will teach me a lot about how to facilitate or help others, you know? So I'm never apart from the healing process. And sometimes when I'm working with somebody and they have a signature that either I have in my own experience, such as I tend to work with a lot of women with sexual trauma because I have that background, right? And I recognize it, I feel it. It's very, very familiar to me to experience that space and what that feels like and what that kind of does to the energy body, to the mental body, and certain ways that they might have just the way they hold themselves and come into life, right? So because I lived it, it's an easy signature for me to feel into. And when I first started doing this work, sometimes it would be like, who's healing who, because when someone would have a release on my table, I'd be weeping and I'd feel like something released from my womb, like that we facilitated a healing for each other. So it's like, who's healing who? I'm not sure who the healer is at that point. So what
Yeah.
you said just reminded me of that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's incredible.
Hearing you talk about your work and feeling into the subtlety and depth that you're making contact with people has me curious about outside of your healing work, having relationships with people, getting coffee in a crowded cafe. I'm
Yeah.
just, yeah, I'm like interested in what's the experience like to have
Mm.
these sensitivities developed, and also this calling I sense in you
Mm.
to heal. I'm curious what that's like just to have in your life.
It's not easy sometimes, and that's the honest answer, especially living in a place like New York City. So, environment has a lot to do with how my nervous system recuperates from the work that I do, right? So, in New York, it's pretty difficult sometimes, and I'm kind of reaching the point where I'm about to switch environments. Like, I have an intention of moving, and that's because I feel like I'm at a point in my practice and in my life where my environment doesn't support my sensitivities anymore. So there is something to that. It's a very fair question, especially because you're constantly engaging in that way, right? And your second perception, let's say, is always on, right? And you might be like, I find subways overstimulating for sure. So over the years, I've sort of become very selective about what environments I put myself into, right? So I can be in intense environments. It's not an issue, but it depends on what the environment is. Is it an ayahuasca ceremony? No problem, or is it a circling place where people are having like raw, vulnerable releases and just being super authentic and with each other and human? Not a problem. For me, the harder spaces are where people have masks on, and where we're just kind of pretending and part of the social matrix. So cafes are not a problem, but the cities like New York, very stimulating for me. I find it much, much easier, especially as I grow older. I think there's that age element too. But especially as I deepen the work, I find it harder and harder to be in certain environments. And I find nature to be my best friend. And I had this experience once when I did a pretty intense retreat, like a 3-day retreat with 20 people. And I had some friends helping me in upstate New York. And after like the first day, when I woke up the next morning, I felt very tired, like very like saturated with other people's information. Because if you're doing that kind of work, you're constantly receiving information, right? You're like, oh, this is what's happening with this person. That's what's happening with that person. And your dreams, your body, everything is just reflecting what's moving through the collective space. That's just what happens for me. It's how it occurs for me. So at that time, I felt like, oh my God, how am I going to do 2 more days of this? Like when I'm already feeling so saturated, right? And then I opened my curtains and I looked at the mountains and I was like, I know exactly what to do. The elements are a shaman's best friend. So all I did was go out. It was summer. I went out they had this beautiful stream, and I sat in the stream and I just looked at the sky and I said, take whatever I don't need anymore. And it was gone within 20 minutes or less. And I woke up and I got up and I was like, it's as if I had had like a solid 8 hours of sleep, which I had not had, because I was so saturated. But then I went in and I was able to do the rest of it. And I realized that was my big sort of aha moment. I mean, I knew that nature was more supportive, of course, it's supportive for everybody. But I realized to do this work, especially if I'm doing like bigger groups and things like that, I'll need to be closer to the elements if I want to go as deep as I like to go. Otherwise, I'll have to go a little less deep. So I hope that answers your question. Sometimes it's not easy. Often it's not. But I'm not victimizing myself. I'm just recognizing what my form needs and what works for this work, and I love it. So I'd rather be in an environment that supports it and keep doing it rather than being like, well, no, I can't. And I'd rather do something else. Yeah.
Beautiful. I love the phrase, the elements are a shaman's best friend.
They are.
Yeah. I'm wondering too, even on a like personal relationship level. I know with Sai and I, when Sai gets strong intuitive hits where she's like reading my mind, that can be really supportive and nice. There are times where it feels it's received that way. And then it also can be challenging. There's sort of like a privacy that we're used to. Like the skull is sort of a very private place. What happens inside of that thing?
So we think.
And yeah. And yeah, I'm wondering. Let me know if this is too personal, but I'm just curious what that's like in your close relationships and your friendships and family relationships and romantic relationships, having this kind of sensitivity. I imagine it's both beautiful, but then I'm also imagining there's challenges.
You're correct about on both counts. You are. It's true. With family, family is always the toughest in some ways, but they're also my greatest teachers. I've learned so much from them about like my shit,
Yeah.
and where I start projecting. They've taught me a lot about where I project and how I project. Close friendships too. I've definitely learned from those. And at times it's really beautiful because, actually I can share a story. It's not too personal. I was glamping once with three very close friends. So it was four of us. And we were in the middle of nowhere, Arizona, close to Grand Canyon, and we shared a huge tent, with beds and everything, but it was four of us in the same tent. And each night I dreamt about a different person in the room and what was going on with them. And I wake up and be like, hey, do you want to know like this thing, that I saw? For real, it's so funny because, but that kind of stuff happens to me all the time, and sometimes I don't have to be in the same space as somebody for me to get this information. And a lot of the times in my friendships and relationships, this information is welcome, because I have good people around me, at least at this point in my life. But sometimes I'll cross a boundary without meaning to. I'm not trying to do that, but I'm getting this information. And then I feel sort of excited about sharing it because just what I got, and then it's like, oh, that was not cool. You had no right to go there. Right. And, it's learning that dance. What I've learned is, even if I get a lot of information about people or I get sort of something very specific for them, I still have to ask permission to share what I get. So I'll always be like, hey, do you want to know I had this thing? Do you want to know about it? And 99% of the time, the answer is yes. Like everyone wants to know about them, more about themselves, right? And also because a lot of my friends work with me, and some of them are my students, so they are aware of the work I do. And so I'm lovingly called the witch doctor or something, like they have their funny names for me like that, so So whenever someone has an issue, you go to the witch doctor. So, and she might have a dream about you. That's just the way it goes. But then there have been times when it's unwelcome, and I had that happen in a close friendship as well, where it was like, I need space from you because that was not cool that you just went there. And I was like, but I wasn't trying to. And so yeah, blessing and a curse. It's very true. In intimate relationships, it's very fascinating how it shows up. I was dating somebody who was dating other people and wasn't very honest about it, right? And I literally, like, I slept in his bed and I woke up and I was like, so, how about we talk about what you're not telling me?
Oh no.
And I mean, I had very little skill about articulating the information I got at that phase in my life. I was younger, and he just kept getting wider-eyed and wider-eyed, and I legit freaked him out a little bit, but he also didn't have the guts to lie about it at that point. So that was very fascinating. Like, I cannot lie to myself about my partners. I mean, I still can. Sure, I'll like deny it and say, oh, maybe it's my imagination, whatever. But sometimes it's like a thing. If you're that close to somebody, your energies are totally enmeshed because you're being intimate with them. Then it's like really hard to not take in what's going on with them. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, that I'm so glad you added that piece on, because that was going to be my next question is, like, do you get information that's unwelcome? Like you're receiving, it's like, sometimes I joke, like, I have to sleep in a different room because Jonathan is thinking too loud. Sorry.
That was a lot.
His mind will be so active even in his dreams that it's like I can't even, I'm like just dreaming his dream, or it's like confusing to whatever I'm doing in my dream, and I'm like, wait, I want to have my dream. So
I feel weirdly proud about that. Thinking too much.
yeah. But for me though, it's like, it's not as clear. I can just feel that he's thinking. I can't necessarily tell the things that he's thinking about. But I also have noticed that over the last couple of years, this awareness, like the depth of awareness, like the widening of awareness is becoming more inclusive of more things. Like, whereas like you described, I used to, that you would feel the feeling. It's like, there's like more of the picture is becoming clear over time, especially the more that I'm in these practices, like circling, or like in really in depth connection with people on a regular basis, and training my attention and my presence in these spaces and in the work with the death work. It's like the picture is just becoming, it's like filling out more through practice, whether the practice is intentional or unintentional. If I'm just putting my intention is to be with these people in this very special way, this natural thing occurs where you start seeing more.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah. It's I think it's more of a blessing than a curse, but there is a skill that needs to be learned about when to share, what to share, who to share with. That's the other thing.
Yes.
Like, who to share with is very important, because I think in the past I was not so selective, and then I would get in trouble. Now I have discernment is the word, discernment, knowing when to go in, when to not. And the easiest way with all of it is permission, if you just ask permission, even with your partner, because sometimes with the partner, it's like almost implied permission. You're sleeping next to me. I can't help it, There are certain tools to help with that as well, So after I have a particularly strong day of sessions, especially if I've worked with people dealing with certain heaviness in their lives, I will smoke my tobacco. I don't smoke, like, I'm not a smoker, but I use tobacco for cleansing purposes like that, So that's more from my shamanic traditions. I'll blow smoke on myself and certain parts of my body, I'll definitely bathe or shower, wash it off, and then just kind of intentionally let go, like, okay, this is not mine and I don't want, right? Like I did have a period where I had to specifically, like, before bed, be like, I don't want any more input from others right now. I really just want to be in my own things, because I got a lot going on and I can't handle more information coming in. And that, like, there's whatever this thing is, where it's coming from, right? Whether it's your higher self or the collective consciousness, whatever you want to call it, wherever it's coming from, there's a relationship you're ultimately forming, and you're just like, nope, not doing it. It would be kind of like spirit allies in the shamanic world, where you learn who your allies are, and when to invoke them and when to say, no, this is not the time. I have a friend who once told me, he's a Taurus, who once told me, you can just have office hours, you don't have to be on 24/7.
That's awesome.
So
it's been such a wonder to have you on the container. Ever since we first got to experience your magic, yeah, we've really wanted you on, and we finally get you. And we get to share it with our audience. Before we finish, I wonder if there's a way for people to get your services. If someone is listening to this and is like, Lubaina has the answers for me, or has some healing for me, or I would really like to try this out.
sure.
Yeah. How would they find you?
Yeah, so my website is lifeishealing.net, and I can also send you guys all the links so you can throw it in there. I do have a
Mhm.
podcast that is a little bit neglected at the moment, but that's because I've just been really busy traipsing all over the world trying to avoid living in New York during the winter. So, um, so that is also called Life is Healing with Lubaina. So those are the easiest ways to get in touch with me. But if you guys want, I can also give my email, and people can email me and reach out with either questions or, if they want a session. I do this work distantly as well as in person. In person, I'm only available in New York and DC at the moment. DC is where I go every couple of months or so. And sometimes I get invited, like where I met you guys, I was invited to go down and be there for a week. So if someone organizes that, then that happens. And you would think that that would be all over my social media and website, but it's not. So I need to be a little bit more on top of that kind of stuff. But the easiest way is to get a hold of me via email or my website, and then I'll take it from there.
Mm. Awesome. Yeah, well, all those links will be in the show notes. So I really encourage you, if you're listening to this, to check it out. Almost especially if you're skeptical, I would say that's my experience.
Yes.
I don't know if that's.
I work with
Yeah.
all kinds of people, belief is not a requirement. Openness, perhaps, like
Hmm.
openness, curiosity, kind of what you ask for in circling two, right? Or
Yeah.
in any
Mhm.
kind of authentic relating, you're like, openness, curiosity, wanting to explore. That's really all we need, Otherwise, I don't need you to believe anything. It's all good.
Wonderful. The container is now closed.